recording now and we can get going.
Wonderful. All right, Mike, thank you. Well, super excited today. We have lunch with a legend, Hank Moore, and Hank is going to introduce himself here shortly. He's had an impactful career, and we are super excited. He's going to share some of his long-term secrets with us today on how to help people mentor and what is great leadership. So my name is John Rubito. I'll introduce myself here in a second. Today, again, we're going to talk about leadership in corporate America, and not only what it is to be a leader versus a boss, but also how do we shape those individuals within our current organizations to become leaders of the future. Because it's not us that are in the leadership roles that are important, it's how do we shape the folks in the future. And on top of that, how do we do that in the complexity of a COVID world where we're working remotely? So my name is John Rubito. I've been with TransTech IT Staffing for about 7 years now. I've been in the industry for 25 years. You could see my Twitter address there if you want to follow me on Twitter. Very proud of the fact that TransTech was voted #1 company to work for in Illinois this year, which is great. I will share my information at the end also if anyone would like to talk to me about a 15-minute analysis about what we're seeing in the job market today, because it's constantly evolving from week to week. So, Hank, why don't you give us a little introduction about yourself?
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here with you. I've been a corporate strategist. I hold the trademark as America's only corporate strategist for many, many years. And I'm the guy who generally works with the CEOs and the boards of directors when the company is at a crossroads and they need to be turned around. And I've done that for Texaco, AT&T, Marriott, Hewlett Packard, lots of companies, and some cities and some nonprofit organizations. I reorganized United Way of America after a couple of scandals way back when. And the other area that I get involved in, which kind of relates to today, is crisis management and preparedness. I'm one of the guys who advised the saccharin industry after saccharin was banned and how we brought it back on the market and we promoted healthy lifestyles. And I also represented Johnson & Johnson after Tylenol. The tainted Tylenol created a scandal back in the 80s, and we brought the company back. So a lot of times people say to me, boy, it would be nice to be a fly on the wall. What do they talk about in those boardrooms when big crises hit? Well, what we talk about is how we prepared for it, what we're going to do proactively, and how we pull the plan off the shelf. And that's one of the things that I learned about businesses over the years, been working with thousands of companies over the years, including 100 of the Fortune 500. You know, a lot of times they just want to keep doing business as usual, more of the same, more of the same. And they don't understand the warning signs and the danger signs and when they need to make a shift. And generally when they do is when a major crisis hits, like COVID or 9/11 or the dot-com bust, as happened in the tech world. And I remember saying to Hewlett Packard, why don't we sell this consulting? You got to think of yourself as more than just selling products to people. Sell the consulting. Thus came the consulting division. You know, sometimes the answers to business are right in front of us, but sometimes it takes somebody objective, someone who's a good mentor to help them see, you know, past the forest, so to speak. And so that's what's happened with COVID, is it's taught people that things aren't necessarily going to be the same. There are a lot of things that worked in the past that don't anymore. And conversely, there are a lot of things that companies did earlier in their business lives that they could turn around and bring back. I have a concept, I have 20 business concepts trademarked. The business tree is my biggest one, which is basically that you look at the whole of any organization, then you look at the parts as they relate to the whole, and then you look back at the whole again. And sometimes you see a lot of gems in there, and I have another one called 3 Rights Offset a Wrong. Sometimes companies have done things and they think they've made mistakes over the years, but someone has to say, No, you need to start thinking that way again. So that's the one thing since COVID, business in the new normal is going to be a little different. And by the way, the next crisis is going to be around the corner in a couple more years. They're always, the last recession, I predicted that for 15 years and people didn't want to hear about it. But, we've had recessions happen every handful of years, and there will be another probably in another 3 or 4 years. I think the last thing I would say about that is small business and mid-sized business learn to work on a dime and change more often than the bigger companies. People say to me, "Oh, you've worked with all these major companies and you reorganized AT&T twice." Well, yeah, the first time was after deregulation by the government who busted up the Bell system, told you have to change, you have to adapt, you have to move forward. But the art of it is how you move forward. So the change is 90% positive. So I ask, why do people fear change when change is in most of our best interest? And the average person and the average organization, business, change at the rate of 71% per year. They don't even realize it. So my question then is the change for the good or the bad? And when you change and make some positive updates and think beyond it, and those people that are listening who are staffing placements, you are the agents of change no matter where you go in the company. Technology is 1% of the big picture of business. Then you factor in all the others. So when the placements go into the companies, the more big picture they're thinking, the more technology departments see what they do as relating to all of the other parts of the business, they're going to be more successful, and they're going to be seen as big picture staff members, executives, and departments.
Yeah, it's amazing how organizations don't realize how much they've changed, and employees are always fearful of change, Hank. But
Yeah.
if everyone really thinks back about how their lives have changed in the last 18 months, from both a personal and a professional perspective, they should be able to adapt to anything.
Well, in my professional opinion, and I said this after the 2008, 2009 recession, people kept saying, why did so many companies go out of business? A lot of them weren't prepared for change. A lot of them weren't prepared. Now, something like the pandemic could not necessarily have been anticipated, but research tells us that 85% of the time, if you plan for adapting to crises, you will avert the crisis. For a small business, a crisis could be, an unexpected lawsuit, the loss of a key customer due to mergers and acquisitions, other things that happen. Environmental crises. My friends in California are reeling from wildfires over the last 4 years. My friends along the Gulf Coast and companies that I've worked with, hurricanes and tornadoes, all of that. You can't tell people in advance when it's going to come, but you got to know that it's going to come. So you got to be ready. And the art of being ready makes those people that you're placing in the companies more valuable to the company. If they can see themselves as agents of change, their book value is going to be, they're going to be of higher value to the company, and they're going to be more marketable in the marketplace.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I guess one of the things also what we've learned over the pandemic is setting people up for success in the future. So, we have some younger folks working for our organization, but they want to look to go into leadership roles in the future. However, it's really not the easiest thing to do to mentor people when you're doing it over a Zoom or a Teams meeting. So getting those people ready for the future is always a day-to-day challenge, because that's what their careers crave.
Well, they need the training. I've conducted heir apparent workshops for corporations and try to tell them, how to think and act and behave like management early on. In each of my books, there are a couple of chapters on this subject. By the way, there are technology chapters. By the way, there are marketing chapters. So my books are soup to nuts encyclopedias, and I have a bunch of them out. And it's all about looking at the whole, then the pieces, then the whole. So I hesitate to say, but it's really probably true. A lot of the companies that went out of business, up to 25% of them during the pandemic, probably should have. They didn't have what it takes to make long term. People talking about, oh, poor restaurants. I agree. We all love restaurants. But the reality is 90% of restaurants fail in the first 2 years. And a lot of them,
true.
yeah, and they're just not prepared to make it. A lot of the restaurants, and I've advised many of them over the years, they go into business for ego reasons. Someone has a recipe, but they don't know how to, it's like a lot of entrepreneurs have said to me, how do you, I'm the guy who comes up with the widget. I ought to be able to run a widget company. Go, no, you need to bring widget makers in. And people need to stop thinking like the core business, whatever that widget could be. They need
Correct.
to think like leadership, and leadership is a higher level than management. Managers are not leaders. Very few of them are. And then leaders. So that would be my best advice to young people. That was my advice when I started my career. I started working when I was 10 years old, and I was a radio disc jockey. And the owner of the radio station pulled me aside, and she said, her name was Lady Bird Johnson. And she said, you are a visionary. You are a humanitarian, and smiled at me and said, now grow into the roles. And then she said, oh, by the way, radio's not our core business. And I said, oh, really? What is? And she said, Washington, D.C., if and when her husband became president. So I went from being a radio disc jockey in my first career to being a White House advisor in my second. Now, no one asks you, but you prepare yourself by absorbing all you can. One of the things that I did growing up, it's my best advice to young people, because I was the token young person the first 30 years of my career. And I was always hanging around the older people that were wiser, and they were giving me all kinds of advice. And one time I was in Washington. I was 17 years old, and I was at sitting in a waiting room going into a luncheon, and I was sitting on a couch, and sitting on my left was the one and only Walt Disney. And he said, kid, I got some advice for you. And he said, yes, sir, Mr. Disney, what should I remember? He said, there's 6 creative ways to generate a good idea. And if it doesn't have that many arms and legs to it, it's not a good idea. I went, whoa, people tell you all their secrets if you're wide-eyed and listen. And then sitting to the next of me, on the other side was Howard Hughes. He said, kid, I have some advice for you. I said, yes, sir, Mr. Hughes. He said, keep a pocket full of note cards and write this stuff down. You're going to come out of this with a series of books one day. And he was right. When I was 17 years old, I wasn't thinking about writing histories. So we don't want to live in the past, but when I speak at corporate events, I give a lot of anecdotes about client activities, the ones that I have the okay to talk about. Companies like Disney, Mr. Disney said to me when I was 17, he said, you're a smart kid. Someday you're going to be advising my company, turning it around after I'm gone. And, 32 years later, it happened. And no, you don't know. You just assume you're going to be in it for the long term,
Correct.
So, and when I was working in radio to begin with, I didn't want to be a one-hit wonder. People said, well, who do you want to be when you grow up? I said, I want to be Perry Como or Neil Diamond or someone like that. Dick Clark, always around, always evolving, always adapting. And there are too many one-hit wonders in companies. There are 4 kinds of businesses. The ones that start out because it's a new and creative widget, and a lot of them are destined to be acquired by bigger companies. In my mind, where I come from, you nurture every company as though it's going to be acquired as part of a roll-up, and then you advise them on how to do the roll-up. And then there's the companies that only have short lifespan. Research tells us that 44.1% of companies cannot grow into large organizations. So they have to know when enough is enough. And 66.7 companies will never get any bigger than they are now. So, and I run into a lot of companies that they want the fame and fortune that someone else had, and they want to go through life as a carbon copy of them. That was one of the first lessons I learned when I was a 10-year-old in working in radio. My other mentor was a guy named Bill Moyers, who for many years hosted TV shows on PBS, but he was just a 24-year-old newscaster at the time. And he said, kid, if you can't take the dirtiest job in any company and do it better than anyone else, you'll never be management. And being one of a kind is really tough, but you got to do it. You got to show how you rise above the crowd. And that's my best advice to younger people. And, you know, we've got 5 generations in the workforce right now. The ones that I usually mentor and advise are the 2 youngest ones on how to be part of the solution, not the problem, how to grow, how to be the leader of all leaders in your company. And that gives you some book value to have a better career.
It's all exciting stuff. So have you seen a lot of people fall into traps during that time, Hank?
Oh, yeah, Lord, yes. I mean, in addition to wanting to be a carbon copy, you know, there's different crises that people and organizations fall into. And one of them is what I call the high cost of doing nothing. We just want to do things the way we always have. We're not going to change. You're not going to make me change. I've got a couple of chapters on that in my books. And one of them, I had the biggest excuses they use. People get very parsimonious about not changing. You're not going to make me change. Well, the marketplace will. And so then the other kinds of crisis is doing things we always have, career-wise and company-wide. Then you get into bad work, shoddy work, make good work. You know, this gets into quality management. Quality management is not an esoteric thing, but if you try to get everything right the first time, and that's what I learned from the entertainment industry, most of the great hit records were cut on the first take. They couldn't get any better. And some of the best, you know, filming in the entertainment industry, I learned that from Steven Spielberg back when he and I were both 22 years old. You know, you always get it on the first take because it's always going to be it might be your only chance to get it right. So, you know, and then the other thing is, then you look at how you avert the crisis. You know, 2%, one of the biggest crises in business is that the reality is only 2% of companies have a plan of action. Is it any wonder that they fail? And some of the biggest companies in America have no strategic plan. They might have some marketing slogans, or they might have some, you know, bean counter objectives, but that's not a marketing plan. I mean, that's not a strategic plan in itself. So you have to really look at, number one, the business you're really in and how this is my business tree I'm talking about now. Branch 1, the business you're really in, how your core business is changing and evolving. Branch 2 is running the business, how you're going to make that widget, how you're going to get it to market, all that good stuff. Number 3 is financial, got to have the financial there. And generally, that's about as far on the 7 prongs on the business tree that most companies ever get. Those 3 parts of the tree, they put all of their energy on, thus neglecting the 4 the remaining parts, which is branch 4, people. You know, the most neglected part of an organization is people. 28% of the emphasis of the big picture. And that's where your HR and your training and your placement and your outsourcing and all of that fits in. You know, how you make that part. Then you get into the other area, branch 5, business development. Where do they make cuts when they want to trim budgets? They cut training. Research tells us that today's workforce needs 3 times the amount of training they're present getting in order to be competitive, much less to move forward. And then you get into the business development, which is advertising, marketing, public relations, research, that wonderful subject that no one ever wants to spend money on. It comes back to bite you. And then the final 2 parts of the tree, you can't have a tree with 5 branches, main branches. 99.999% of every employee, every consultant, every expert goes on one of those 5 branches. Those of us who are in the trunk and roots of the tree, there aren't many. Trunk of the tree, you can't have a tree without a trunk. The trunk is understanding the relationship of all of the parts of the tree, the business, the marketplace, and their relationship to each other, and forces outside your tree, your company, your marketplace, that could come up and bite you, kill you. And one of the things we always look at is how we build collaborators, partners, and joint venture participants, how to grow companies even further by getting out of their comfort zones. And then the final part is category 7, the big picture. You know, most businesses don't think about big pictures until a crisis. Can we say COVID? Can we say 9/11? Can we say the dot-com bust? Can we say the 7 recessions that we've had over the last 30 years forced them to do so? So, and it's stuff they should have done probably originally. So you're looking at all of those dynamics, and it's really, you know, I throw in a lot of statistics, but you know, companies, only 2% of all consultants really are consultants. A lot of them are vendors selling products. So, you know, you just want to look at what's in the best opportunity for the company, for the marketplace, for the employees, and most of all, the customers. That gets into one of my other favorite subjects, customer-focused management. It's not just customer service, you know, dialing and smiling. It is not just answering the phone correctly. It's inculcating customers into every major business decision you make. What's in the customer's best interest of creating new widgets, of creating new widget making processes, and so on and so forth. It's customer-focused management is the umbrella over everything.
Absolutely.
The path, how good companies do great things. And also it's the antithesis to how they do bad things. I've got one of my book chapters called The Path from Pleasure to Success. And it looks at 7 stages, you know, the initial joy over, we're in business. Disney went through the same thing. There was a lot of joy and wonderfulness the first 20 years, and then all the crisis hit, and they had to become a different company. As Mr. Disney confided in me when I was 17 years old, and I was way too young to understand it fully at the time, do now. And but so you know, you have to understand, and there's 7 different paths that any company can take, from birth, from conception, from birth through the teenage years. They parallel the cycles of life, and too many companies after about that get stuck in the teenage years. They never quite mature, thus they crater and die before they should have, and that's one of the things. But businesses are in transition. The employees, the placements outsourced that can see those things are going to be more valuable to the company. And then you get into the public company obligations. I've taken a bunch of companies public on Wall Street, and it's not just buckets of money, it's about things you need to do. And then the last one, charity involvement, and I think maybe if I come back with you again, and we can talk completely about charity and cause-related marketing, and how good companies are seen as heroes in the community. You know, no one is in business to give all of their time away, but when you do it, make it count. That's what my first mentor said to me, Mrs. Johnson said to me, you know, you are a visionary. That's what I'm talking to you about today, is visionary stuff that I learned after a lot of years of doing it for a living. And she said, you are a humanitarian. And that's one of the things I was taught from the get-go was, if you're going to be visible on charity boards of directors, the best contracts are yours for the taking when you're sitting at a charity board meeting. If people like you and trust you, they're going to do business. Every company has an obligation to serve the communities they do business in. The art and skill with which you do it is the secret. In fact, one of my books I wrote on that subject, it was called Nonprofit Legends. This was my 9th book. And it's all about everything you need to know: fundraising, volunteer recruitment, all that kind of stuff. So it's, and of all my 14 books, this one is special because it's about charity and community involvement, which is the backbone of everything. When you earn the right to do business, you're going to be seen as a good shepherd of business.
That's great advice. All right, at this point, Mike, we're going to open it up to questions.
Yeah, great. We have several really good ones. I guess the first question that we'll go with is it a lack of leadership communication that causes fear of change in an organization?
Yes, but even broader than that, it's a lack of understanding. It's not, communication is not is what you do all the time. When do you need to communicate with your customers and your workforce? When things are good? Yes. When things are bad? Yes. Every time in between? Yes. When do you need to plan? You know, I just said that 98% of all companies have no plan. They don't know where they're going. So if you're thinking beyond it, that would be one of the key things I hope people take away from today in listening, is think to plan. And if you plan, part of it is you communicate, part of it is you bring other people in. With every innovation in a company, there's only going to be 10% of your stakeholders, they're going to be with you from the get-go. On the other end, there's going to be 10% who are never going to be with you. It's how you engineer that other 80% in between that gets people on board sooner rather than later. So it's just, there's just a lot to think about, and communication can do no good unless there is strategy that's the umbrella over it. So you plan, you think, you communicate, you study. You know, there's only 4 elements of planning and strategy. There's you think through it, you plan it, you do it, you measure it. And the measurement part is always the next leg of the next level. And if you communicate it all the way along the way, you're going to be more successful.
You said something to the effect of the current workforce needs 3 times more training. Why do you think that is?
Because they're not taught the right things. They're not taught, you know, too many people in niche industries, and you know, they're taught how to think like techies or like bean counters or like marketing people, but they're not seeing themselves as beyond that. What kind of training do they ever get? Techie training, bean counter training, how to sell better and further. But what they need beyond that is how to be ambassadors for their company, how to be agents of change. And there's not that kind of training out there. Most of the training that the workforce is getting is very technical and very skill focused. And, you know, it's just, I've got another one of the categories in one of my books talked about the American workforce. People go, oh, well, the entire motivation to succeed at your job and thus your career is money. No, that's one of 26. The other 25 include being part of the solution, innovating in the company, being well thought of. The youngest two generations in the workforce would be millennials and now Generation Z coming into the workforce, have a pride in workmanship that sometimes the older folks forgot. There is a pride. You talk to millennials about being committed to something long term and being part of the solution. That's music to their ears, especially coming from someone who's from an older generation.
That's a perfect transition to our next question is, if you need this training and you need this mentorship, should you look inside your organization or should you look outside of your organization for someone?
Outside. And if you do that, then you bring it inside, then you become. I can remember many, many times that, one of the things that I do when I'm doing work with workshops and heir apparent programs is I ask everybody to write down very quickly the top 10 things they ever learned in their career that really impacted them, that really took them to make it long term. And what you find is when you go back, all of us go back and study, that only 2 of the top 10 things that people learned were taught by formal teachers, formal mentors. Don't look to what they taught you in textbooks in college to make you a big picture thinker. It makes you a technocrat. It makes you a niche kind of thing. I mean, when I was at college, my advisors used to say, you're going to be a generalist for the rest of your life. I said, yeah, I'll be one of the few, but I'm going to do it and do it well. That's what I've been doing. Oh, okay. It was like, it was a shock, surprise, when the world wants you to be super, super specialized, you got to be general. And so 2 of the top 10 things are things that teachers taught you. 4 of the top 10 things that you learned in your career was by watching other people doing the wrong things. I've been involved in advising hundreds of strategic plans. And one of the first things we do, we want to know, who do we want as a customer? Who is our marketplace? We look at what our competitors did to mess up, how they missed the warning signs. And so what you learn in your career is some of the best advice is from people that totally screwed up their careers. And then you learn that of the top 10 things you get, probably another 2 or 3 are self-taught. You want to, as an employee, as a leader on the rise, you want to start learning on your own. You can get mentors from the outside. You can read books. Mine happen to be the only encyclopedias of business. Most business books tend to be about selling more. They don't talk about how you do it. They don't talk about why you do it, and other kinds of books. But you need to learn beyond that, and just be inquisitive, ask the questions. And that's why people tune in programs like this, is you get to hear speakers. Normally they would never get access to someone like me who was that broad and that, but it's too bad, I mean, we just have, people have to learn from various. And then the last couple of areas that people really learn from is by looking at the past. You don't want to live in the past. Some of my books are written about fun, entertaining things. I wrote a book about Hollywood years ago, and that was the book that got me on the Oprah show. And I have one coming up about the music industry, which everyone and their uncle is going to love. But then they say, oh, an encyclopedia about business. You're trying to make me think too hard. Yeah, I can entertain you talking about the music industry, but we need to be thinking and moving forward. So that's why I have 2 different sets of books that I do. I've got my business books and my fun, entertaining books. But anyway, it's just, we learn from history. Some of the best ideas were created in the past, succeeded in the past. And if we can take those ideas, give them a new coat of paint, maybe even adapt other ideas from companies we admired, that's where the great new ideas are coming from, is about, many of them are coming from things that worked in the past or didn't work.
Um, Along those lines there, how can you spot a bad mentor from a good one? So if you see somebody, you may trust them, but you come to a realization that maybe they're not necessarily giving you what you're exactly looking for. How do you decipher?
Well, I got a chapter about that subject in Big Picture Business, book 3. And the kinds of mentors that most people run into are people that retired recently from an industry, or they were the victim of one too many downsizing. They didn't have what it took to make it long term. And they'll say, well, in my day, this is what we did. You need to do a carbon copy of what I did growing up. Well, if what you did was working, why were you downsized? The other area about mentors is that a lot of times people will listen to mentors from an industry. I worked in the XYZ widget industry, therefore I'm an expert on XYZ widgets. Well, good mentors need to talk to you and teach you how to hone those people's skills, how to develop customer focused management, no matter what your niche is. So, 80% of business is good business. It's not knowing how the widget is made. I've worked with virtually every other industry, and a lot of times I don't know how their widget was made. That's not my job. It's how to be a better widget company and how to be leaders for your industry. And so that's really it. And then the best kinds of mentors are those that's what they do. They didn't retire into mentoring. There are organizations in business organizations, in communities. I've been part of some think tanks. One of them is a group called Silver Fox Advisors. And that's what we do. We advise people what's in their best interest. We're not trying to peddle something. When I said 2% of all consultants really are, that's the problem. If you were to go on the internet and were to get mentoring from some of the people that advertise on the internet, they're trying to get you to buy off the shelf programs. That's not mentoring. That's selling off the shelf programs. And it's not right, but in capitalist society, people do that. My concern is that a lot of people needing the mentorship are going to the wrong sources for the wrong reason.
We have two more questions for you. What is an intangible skill set a future leader should work on?
Understanding where you've been, where you're going, that there is a path to get somewhere, and developing, watching the other people, what they do to screw up, learning what you've learned first, and then moving forward, and then being parts of teams. One of the tenets of customer focused management and total quality management in bigger companies is that work teams have to help and support each other. There is an art to being a team. And that's one of the things I learned with my early work with the entertainment industry and the music industry and Hollywood. It was always seen as a team. No one was the one and only star. It was always a team. And you think about how you build those internal work teams. Again, the young person that takes the bull by the horns and sees that maybe building that team is a fundamental part of their job, not just doing the technical skills stuff, they're going to be more valuable. And by the way, there was a time they said that most people had, 3 careers in them in their lifetime. Now the current body of research tells us that most people have at least 7 careers. And you have people, that's another post-COVID thing. How people, I've always said if you shook the tree and all of the, the apples fell out of the tree and you put them back on different branches, they'd probably get on different branches. But if you're bringing the technical skills plus the people skills, then you're going up the fast track of management.
All right, final question, a fun one. Who is the most interesting person that you've worked with over your long career?
Lee Iacocca was one of them with Chrysler. I advised him early on. He was the young heir apparent at Ford. He's the guy who created and put the Mustang on the market. And Henry Ford hated his guts and fired him and got rid of him. So then he moved over to Chrysler. And I became one of his advisors on how to turn around Chrysler. And one of the first things I said to him, because he listens, that's one of the big issues of those that make it long term. They listen, they grow, and they don't get stuck in their route. And he could have been stuck in a route saying, well, that Henry Ford, I'll get him and I'll beat him in the marketplace. No, you're never going to be Ford, but you sure can be the best version of Chrysler that you can be. And one of the pieces of advice I advised him was, I took Mr. Howard Hughes's suggestion that he said to me when I was 17 years old. That's the other thing. You always steal ideas and adapt ideas from the best. And the more you remember that, he said to me, keep a pocket full of note cards, and it's what you do with those note cards that perpetuate your career. Well, I said to Lee Iacocca, let's have a pocket full of note cards. I stole Howard Hughes's idea. And I said, let's have things written down that when you go down on the assembly line and you thank people warmly for a job well done, and you say something, by the way, congratulations, your kid just became a National Merit Scholarship finalist. Whoa, research tells us that their productivity and their loyalty is going to go up by 3 times. You know, talking about the nonprofit thing, research tells us that employees of companies that wear the company t-shirt and occasionally walk in a fun run as ambassadors of the company, and they see themselves as ambassadors, their productivity is going to go up 3 times what it was. Their loyalty is going to go up. So it's just, there's all those elements, and it's understanding what's going to make you as an employee the most valuable, what's going to make you as a leader. You don't ever settle for just being a worker bee. You don't ever settle for just being a manager, because most managers are not leaders. So it's what you do and how you're going to go. And you know, when I was in college, my dean kept saying, what do you do? You're never here. You skipped class and we let you get away with murder. And I used to say, well, I'm a White House advisor and a disc jockey. And they'd say, both? I said, yeah, it's the same thing, believe me. And I found myself going on SCO Pro because I was always cutting class because I was doing the people's business. And, you know, helping write the Civil Rights Act and stuff like that was more important to me than being in college classes. You know, I was failing biology for the 3rd time. And I went to my dean, I said, would you please just waive the science requirement of all your students? Who's going in the Hall of Fame first? They said, well, you are. I said, yeah, actually, I was just inducted into one when I was 19. I said, would you just waive the science requirement? I have no aptitude for this. Yeah, okay. Don't tell the other kids.
That's the last of our questions, so I'll turn it back over to you, John.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Hank. Again, was a great honor to have you on today. There's Hank's contacts and information. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to him directly. Follow him on social media, obviously, on LinkedIn and on Facebook. Again, there's my contact info. If you want to reach out to me regarding any market intel on what's going on in the marketplace, I'd be more than happy to share information with you. So thank you again, Hank. It was a real pleasure. It was great. And we'll be posting this on our YouTube channel within the next 24 hours.
Very good. My honor. And we'll talk again in a few months, maybe about nonprofit and charity and some other leadership things. There's so many dynamics to share. And I thank the audience for their willingness to think big picture.
Thank you, Hank. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.